Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. Sometimes one sentence reveals exactly where you stand in someone's life. And sometimes the most powerful response to being devalued is simply walking away without drama or explanation. My name is Tyler, and this is how my girlfriend chose her friends over me and didn't expect my next move. I'm 28 years old and worked as a content strategist for a digital marketing agency in Portland, Oregon. It was solid work that gave me the creative fulfillment of developing messaging strategies for various clients. I'd been with the company for about 4 years when I met Josephine. Josephine was 26, working as an events coordinator for a large hotel chain. She had this magnetic social energy that drew people to her, and a genuine interest in connecting with people. Our early relationship felt like exactly what I'd been looking for after years of casual dating that never quite developed into something substantial. In our early years of dating, we'd have these long conversations about everything from our childhood experiences to our dreams for the future. She was fun to be around without being exhausting. Within the first few months of dating, we became inseparable. We'd spend most evenings together, either at her apartment or mine. I found myself thinking about long-term possibilities with Josephine in ways I hadn't with previous relationships. Josephine's social circle was extensive and constantly active. She had her college friend group, her work friends, her yoga studio crew, and various other connections she'd made through her naturally outgoing personality. There were always group dinners being planned, weekend trips being organized, and happy hours being scheduled. Initially, I admired how Josephine maintained all these friendships while also prioritizing our relationship. She'd include me in group activities when it made sense, introducing me to her various friend circles and making sure I felt welcome. But she also maintained separate time with her friends, which I respected and even encouraged. I had my own friendships that I valued, and I thought having independent social lives while also building our relationship together was healthy and balanced. By about 8 months into our relationship, we were having serious conversations about the future. Josephine would mention wanting to get married someday, maybe in 2 or 3 years, once we were more established in our careers. She'd talk about the kind of wedding she envisioned, something medium-sized with lots of friends and family, probably outdoors since she loved nature. We'd discuss where we might want to live long-term, whether we wanted kids eventually, and what kind of life we were building together. These conversations felt genuine and mutual. I wasn't the only one bringing up future plans. Josephine was equally engaged in discussing our trajectory as a couple. She seemed excited about building something long-term with me, about integrating our lives more fully, about moving from dating to partnership. The shift in our relationship began about 1 year and 2 months after we started dating, triggered by an unexpected career crisis. The marketing agency where I worked was acquired by a larger firm, and the new owners decided to restructure operations significantly. My entire department was eliminated, with about 15 people losing their jobs in a single day. We were given 2 months of severance pay and assistance with job placement, but fundamentally, I was suddenly unemployed. I told Josephine about the job loss that same evening, expecting the kind of support and empathy we'd always shown each other during difficult times. Her initial response seemed understanding. She said she was sorry this had happened, that she knew I'd find something new quickly, that we'd get through this challenge together. She even suggested that if I needed to save on rent while job searching, I could move into her apartment temporarily. The offer to move in felt like evidence that Josephine was committed to us as a partnership, that she saw my career setback as something we'd navigate together rather than something that changed how she viewed me. I accepted her offer, moving most of my belongings into storage and bringing just what I needed to her 1-bedroom apartment. For the first few weeks, the arrangement seemed to work. I'd spend my days applying for jobs, working on updating my portfolio, and reaching out to professional connections about potential opportunities. I tried to contribute to the household by doing most of the cooking and cleaning, running errands. I made sure Josephine came home to a tidy apartment and dinner ready. Josephine seemed to appreciate these contributions initially. She'd thank me for cooking, comment on how nice it was to come home to a clean space, and say she didn't mind covering rent and utilities while I got back on my feet. The implicit understanding was that this situation was temporary, that I'd find new work soon, and resume contributing financially. But as weeks turned into a month and then 2 months, I started noticing subtle changes in Josephine's behavior and tone. She became shorter with me in conversations, less patient with minor annoyances, and quicker to snap when something bothered her. The warmth that had characterized our interactions began fading into something cooler and more transactional. Josephine also started spending significantly more time with her friends. Where she used to balance social activities with our couple time, she began saying yes to every invitation from her various friend groups. She'd come home from work, change quickly, and head out for girls' night or group dinners or happy hours. On weekends, she'd be gone most of Saturday and Sunday for brunches, shopping trips, yoga classes, or various activities with different friend circles. I tried to be understanding. Josephine was working full-time and paying all our bills, so she deserved to have fun and maintain her social life. But I also started feeling like I was living alone despite sharing an apartment with my girlfriend. I'd spend entire evenings by myself, cooking dinner for one because Josephine had made plans without telling me. I'd wake up weekend mornings to find her already gone to some activity I hadn't known was scheduled. The most painful part was how Josephine began prioritizing her friends over our planned activities. We'd have tentative plans for a movie night or dinner out, and she'd cancel because her college friends decided to do something or her work crew organized a last-minute event. She'd apologize each time, but never actually change the pattern. Her friends' spontaneous plans consistently took precedence over our scheduled time together. When Josephine was physically present at the apartment, she was mentally elsewhere. She'd be scrolling through her phone constantly, responding to group chats, and making calls then engaging with me. When I tried to tell her about job leads I was pursuing or share something I'd read that day, she'd give distracted half-responses without really listening. Through her phone calls, I noticed that Josephine was sharing significant things about her life with her friends before mentioning them to me. Sometimes, I'd hear secondhand from mutual acquaintances about work opportunities she was considering or problems she was dealing with, things a partner should know first, but that she'd already discussed extensively with some of her friends. The dynamic in our relationship shifted from romantic partnership to something that felt more like awkward roommates who occasionally had sex out of obligation rather than genuine desire. Josephine treated me with surface-level politeness, but no real emotional warmth. I felt invisible in my own relationship, like I was just occupying space in her apartment rather than being someone she valued and wanted to spend time with. I didn't confront Josephine about these changes immediately. Part of me understood that my unemployment was probably creating stress for her, even if she wasn't expressing it directly. Part of me hoped things would improve once I found new work and could contribute financially again. And part of me was just trying to process what was happening, internalizing the hurt of watching someone I loved pull away without explanation. But I was observing everything, filing away each canceled plan and ignored connection attempt. I was noticing how Josephine's face would light up when her friends texted, but remain neutral when I tried to engage her in conversation. I was seeing how she'd rush to respond to group chats while acting uninterested in my conversations. I was understanding gradually and painfully that I'd become a low priority in someone's life where I'd once felt central. About 3 months into my unemployment, my financial situation finally began improving. I'd been taking on freelance content strategy projects where I could find them, slowly building a client base. Then I landed a significant contract with a tech startup that needed comprehensive content strategy work. Social media planning, blog development, email campaigns, the full package. The project was worth a significant amount over 6 months, with strong potential for extension. This felt like a major turning point. I was bringing in consistent income again, enough that I could start contributing meaningfully to household expenses. I could afford to take Josephine out to nice dinners, buy her thoughtful gifts, and generally return to being a financial partner rather than someone being supported. But I didn't tell Josephine about landing this big project. By that point, she'd stopped asking about my job search, stopped showing interest in my professional life, and stopped listening when I tried to share things about my work. I'd learned that my career updates fell on deaf ears, so I simply stopped offering them. I'd mentioned casually that I had some freelance work coming in, but I didn't share the scope or significance of what I'd secured. I started transferring money to Josephine for bills and groceries. I'd restock her refrigerator and pantry without making a big announcement about it. I'd buy her small gifts like the books she mentioned wanting or replace household items that were running low. I was showing through actions that I was back on my feet financially. Josephine acknowledged these contributions with thank yous and expressions of appreciation. She'd comment that it was nice I could help with bills again, that she appreciated me picking up groceries. But the emotional warmth never returned to match these polite acknowledgments. Her behavior toward me didn't change despite my changed circumstances. She still spent most of her time with her friends. She still canceled our plans when her social circle had something going on. She still shared things with friends before mentioning them to me. She still treated me more like a tolerated roommate than a valued partner. My financial recovery, which I'd thought might improve our relationship dynamic, changed nothing about how Josephine prioritized me in her life. I started having trouble sleeping, lying awake while Josephine slept peacefully beside me. I'd find myself pushed to the edge of her bed, metaphorically and literally, scrolling through apartment listings. I was planning my exit even while still physically present in her space, understanding that this relationship had fundamentally changed in ways that couldn't be repaired. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. We'd planned dinner at a restaurant we both liked, actually had a reservation and everything, which was rare given how infrequently we did anything together anymore. I'd been looking forward to this all week, hoping it might be an opportunity to reconnect. About 2 hours before our reservation, Josephine came home from work and announced she was going out with her friends instead. Her college roommate was having a birthday dinner, wanting me to reschedule. Even though Josephine had known about this for weeks and could have mentioned it sooner, she was acting like it was a last-minute thing she'd just remembered. When I pointed out that we had plans, Josephine said her friend's birthday dinner was important and I'd understand. When I mentioned that we barely spent time together anymore, she said I was being unreasonable and that she had the right to maintain her friendships. When I expressed feeling like a low priority, she accused me of being jealous of her social life. Something in me shifted during this exchange. I realized that no amount of understanding, patience, or changed circumstances on my part would make Josephine choose to prioritize our relationship. She'd shown me repeatedly through her actions where I ranked in her life, and her words during this conversation were simply confirming what I'd already known. I told Josephine calmly that I felt like somewhere along the line I'd stopped being a priority to her. I felt invisible next to the people she called friends. That living together had somehow made me less important rather than more integrated into her life. Josephine's response was immediate defensiveness. She said I was being too sensitive and didn't understand how important her friend group was to her. She said she'd spent years building these relationships and wasn't going to sacrifice them just because I couldn't handle her having a social life. I tried to clarify that this wasn't about jealousy or asking her to give up friends. It was about the pattern of canceled plans, the ignored attempts at connection, and the feeling of being consistently deprioritized. It was about how she'd treat a text from friends as urgent while paying no attention to what I was talking to her about. It was about how I'd become an afterthought in my own relationship. Josephine looked at me with frustration and said something that would replay in my mind for months afterward. She said, "Love can wait, but friendship can't. They'll be here after you." The room went completely silent. I stared at Josephine, processing what she just said, understanding that she meant every word. She believed her friendships were more valuable and durable than our relationship. She believed I was temporary, while her friends were permanent. She'd essentially told me that I was disposable in a way her social circle wasn't. I didn't argue or try to explain why this was hurtful. I didn't guilt-trip her or demand she take it back. I didn't create drama or make accusations. I simply nodded slowly, processing the absolute clarity of knowing exactly where I stood, and walked to the bedroom. Josephine seemed confused by my reaction, probably expecting me to fight or plead or get angry. Instead, she watched me pull out my suitcase and start packing my clothes methodically. I gathered my toiletries, my laptop and work materials, and the few personal items I'd brought to her apartment. I was moving with calm purpose, not rushing, but not hesitating. Josephine finally seemed to realize I was actually leaving. She asked where I was going, her voice uncertain now rather than defensive. I didn't answer, just continued packing everything that mattered to me into 2 suitcases and a backpack. I wasn't interested in explanations or conversations. She told me everything I needed to know with that one sentence. Josephine might have thought I was bluffing, that I'd pack dramatically and then unpack once I'd made my point. But when she heard my suitcase zip closed and saw me pick up my bags, heading toward the door, her expression changed to something approaching panic. She started saying we should talk about this, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded, that I was overreacting. I walked out of her apartment without responding to these attempts at conversation. I got a taxi and loaded my belongings, then got driven directly to a hotel. I booked a room for several nights and sat there in the quiet, reflecting on what had just happened. That night became my emotional closure. I wasn't angry or bitter. I was just done. Josephine had shown me through months of behavior that I wasn't a priority, and her words had simply confirmed what her actions had been communicating all along. I didn't need to process this or work through it or try to understand it better. I understood perfectly, and I was choosing to walk away from someone who'd already told me I was replaceable. Over the following days, I focused entirely on rebuilding my independent life. I found a studio apartment available for immediate move-in, small but comfortable and affordable, with my freelance income. I moved my belongings out of storage and set up my own space again. I didn't post anything on social media about the breakup. I didn't block Josephine on any platforms. I didn't call mutual friends to vent or try to control the narrative about why we'd ended. I simply moved forward with my life, focusing on the work I was doing and the person I was becoming without her. My freelance business continued growing. The startup project went well enough that they extended my contract and referred me to other companies. Within a few weeks, I was making more money than I had at my previous corporate job, with more flexibility and creative control. I was building something substantial that was entirely mine. I also got back into routines I'd abandoned. I reconnected with college friends I'd lost touch with, grabbing beers and catching up on life. About 3 weeks after I moved into my own apartment, I got a knock on my door on a Saturday afternoon. I looked through the peephole and saw Josephine standing there, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater rather than the going-out clothes I'd become accustomed to seeing her in. I opened the door and we stood there looking at each other for a moment. Josephine seemed uncertain, like she wasn't sure what reception she'd get. Josephine said she'd gotten my address from a mutual friend, that she'd wanted to talk, that she'd been thinking about everything that happened. Her eyes kept scanning my small apartment, taking in how I'd set it up, noticing that I seemed settled and established rather than struggling. She commented that I was really doing well for myself, and there was something in her tone that suggested surprise. Maybe she'd expected me to be struggling, to be miserable without her, to have realized I'd made a mistake by leaving. Instead, she was seeing someone who looked peaceful and content in a life that didn't include her. I confirmed simply that yes, I was doing well. I was working successfully, living in a space I liked, building a life that felt authentic and satisfying. I wasn't offering details or inviting further conversation, just acknowledging the objective truth that I was fine. Josephine hesitated, probably trying to figure out how to express whatever had motivated her to track down my address and show up unannounced. Maybe she was regretting how things ended. Maybe she was realizing what she'd lost when she told me her friends would be there after I was gone. Maybe she was lonely or confused or dealing with consequences she hadn't anticipated. But I didn't give her an opening to make whatever case she'd come to make. I told her kindly, but firmly, that I didn't hold anything against her, that I hoped she was doing well, but that I couldn't unhear what she'd said. Those words she said had shown me exactly how she viewed our relationship, and knowing that changed everything. Josephine stood in my doorway for another moment, maybe realizing she'd lost someone who'd never been trying to compete with her friends or demand she abandon her social life. I just wanted to be prioritized like a partner should be prioritized, valued like someone building a life with another person should be valued. When she couldn't or wouldn't provide that, I'd walk away without drama or demands. Josephine eventually left, and I closed the door behind her, feeling nothing but certainty that I'd made the right choice. Sometimes you don't need closure from someone who's shown you where you stand. You don't need them to apologize or explain or promise to do better. You just need to accept what they've communicated through their actions and words, and make decisions that honor your own worth. I found peace the night I packed my bags and left Josephine's apartment. Not because I was getting revenge or proving a point, but because I'd stopped participating in a relationship where I was consistently treated as optional. I'd stopped begging for basic consideration from someone who'd already shown me I didn't matter enough to prioritize. The story didn't have a dramatic confrontation or tearful reconciliation. It just had a man who understood his value, a woman who didn't appreciate what she had until it was gone, and the quiet satisfaction of building a life that reflects what you actually deserve rather than settling for what someone's willing to give. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away from where you're not valued, without explanation or attempts to change someone's mind. You just pack your bags, find your peace, and build something better without them. That's what I did, and that's enough.